You know, on this podcast, we'll often sort of talk about how we're behind the K-pop and J-pop podcast. They have like a lot of listeners, and it's very popular music. It's okay. It's flashy. It's empty. Not what we would consider adult music. Let's just say that. Not at all. But let me tell you, K-pop and J-pop is like Beethoven compared to the worst music ever written in human history, European pop.
Oh.
Did you hear any of these songs that were on the Eurovision Song Contest?
I hope not.
Oh, boy. Well, consider yourself lucky, because I've never heard such trash in my life. It's unbelievable.
Poor songwriting?
And the winning song is just terrible.
Why is that?
It's very electronic. It's very artificial. It's kind of like, just to get a joke from the recent Tom Brady roast that somebody made, is like, it's like artificial intelligence wrote it and just didn't use the intelligence. You just get artificial.
Just artificial, you know? I see.
You know? It's really completely soulless. Unbelievable. And like every song is like that.
Wow.
There's an Italian group, in fact, called Maneskin that won it like 2 years ago that had electric guitars. They were like a rock band. And they had a pretty rocking song, you know, against all the other trash. So luckily people had the taste to give them the win. But this year, it's all terrible. I don't know, man.
Glad I missed it.
Well, thankfully we have this oasis here at
That's right.
the Adult Music Podcast.
That's what we're here for. Bringing you not pop music, but classical music and jazz, the best of the recent releases. Every week, 3 of each at Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
Yeah, and this is your co-host, Mike.
This week, it's episode 165. Before we talk about tonight's music, though, I want to go back to last week and give some thanks. First of all, to Lorenzo Bisogno for sharing our episode on Facebook and Instagram. Be sure to check out his recording, It's a New Day, fine saxophone playing from Italy. It's on MM Records. Also, we want to give thanks to Roberto Trainini for sharing the episode on his Facebook page. If you love cello, you need to hear his recording with Stella alla luce Pontoriero.
I was hoping to say that name again. It's really so beautiful.
That was Casella, Moulet, Respighi, Pizzetti, music for cello and piano on Tactus Records. And I want to give a special thanks to Stella, who contacted us and requested copies of the album from Tactus for us. And that was very kind of you, Stella. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, Stella, that's our first, you're going on down in history as our first free classical CD that we've ever received.
Right.
It rains jazz CDs on us, but the classical labels are a bit tighter. I don't know.
Right.
They don't want to let those bullion cubes go. You know?
Actually, if you haven't heard last week's episode, that was Italian Explosion 2. So you definitely want to go back and check out. It was all great Italian music in classical and jazz.
It was a sprezzatura surprise.
We've got enough Italian music for a few episodes, but we'll try to space it out, I guess, going on.
Speaking of which, I also want to send a special thank you to Hannah Eli, the artistic director at Fieri Consort, for sending us a nice message, too, about our talking about her ensemble's album, the Fieri Consort album, which we really liked a lot. So that was nice. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, we got a little response from Gleam Records, too. So it's nice to have a little back and forth, especially with the smaller, medium-sized record companies. I think we can help each other out and get this music spread out, and more people can come to know it.
Fieri Concert's album was The Excellence of Women, by the way. Just kind of space that for a moment.
All right, we've got some sad news tonight, Mike, and this one deserves the special theme. So let me get up to the piano. We have to say farewell to one of the world's most famous saxophonists, David Sanborn, who passed away on May 2nd. He's one of the most commercially successful and influential saxophonists in pop and R&B music. Everyone's heard him on numerous rock and pop hits from David Bowie to Elton John, endless list of other recordings too. Also, if you've ever watched television at night, he was a member of the Saturday Night Live band in 1980. From the late 80s, he was a regular guest member of Paul Schaefer's band on Late Night with David Letterman. Other than seeing him live in performance, one of my favorite memories of David Sanborn was the Night Music Show. This was a late night music show on television, co-hosted with Jules Holland, who went on to have his own show. It was only on from 1988 to 1989. But what was interesting is Sanborn was able to get musicians from these disparate backgrounds, different genres, nothing related, and somehow they would come together and make incredible music. My favorite episode was the one with Phil Woods, where they play Phil's version of Willow Weep for Me over the all blues vamp. And it's a great chance to hear David Sanborn playing something more hard bop-like, because usually he was in the R&B or, more poppy vein. The interaction between the two players is awesome. If you've never seen it, I recommend you just stop listening to us right now. Go over to YouTube and find that video. It's great.
Yeah, worth your time.
Thanks for all the great music in your career and promoting things like night music, David Sanborn. Rest in peace.
A lot of us grew up watching the David Letterman show in the 80s,
right.
And the Paul Schaefer Band was on that show. So they were kind of in our ears every night, during the week. That was a really unique show. I really miss it now that nobody has a sense of humor anymore.
Yeah, that's true. There's nothing funny on TV.
I liked it when people were funny.
All right, before we get into tonight's program, I want to remind everyone that in the episode description, you can find links to Spotify and Apple Music for all the music that we'll discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer. You can also listen to the podcast there as well. That's CD quality streaming music from France. Wherever you listen to us, if you can't find the full description or the recording list and the links are not easily accessible on that application, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, podbean.com. Everything is easy to follow there for this and all previous episodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe and tell a music-loving friend. Help us grow our audience. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music categories that are all done by algorithm, and it's a tough challenge to get over those K-pop and J-pop ones here in Japan. But if you just write a short review, we could use a few more, especially on the Apple Podcasts app. You can also come follow us on our Facebook page and get extra info and new releases throughout the week. I put up a bunch of things this week. See our handsome faces and interaction with the artists. You can leave a message or comment there. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. As always, we want to recommend our friends AJ and Johnny and their podcast, The Same Difference, Two Jazz Fans, One Jazz Standard podcast, where they look at several versions of a jazz standard, and each episode comes out twice a month, usually. They play little samples of each version. They talk about the history with a lot of humor, and they say what they like and don't like about the original and different versions. There's a link to their podcast in the description, and if you stick around to the end of our episode, you can hear their audio promo. We play samples as well. We'll be playing a lot tonight to give you a better idea of this music, and here is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. We also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. There, the preamble is done, Mike. We're ready to jump into this week's program.
Yeah, and I'm pleased to say that this week's program will be mouth-breathing free because I am back in action. My nasal passages are cleared. I'm healed, and I'm drinking bourbon again. So Here we go.
You were stuffed up last week. Also, I want to apologize. So there's a little kind of jittery quality to the audio last week. And I think it might have been due to the solar flares affecting the internet connections. Sometimes we get weird things that happen, but I can repair them. But last week had some strange kind of stuttering and things going on in the audio. That seems to be all cleared up anyway. Yeah,
we're all still here. The solar flares didn't end civilization like some people said they would. And they probably will one day, but we live to listen to music another day. All right, let's hear 6 more albums this week. So here we go. We're going to start with an album on the Alpha label, one of really my favorite labels, our favorite labels, I think we can say, of Mozart, one of my favorite composers. This is an album of vocal works called Mozart, You Drive Me Crazy. Really interesting title. Right. This is by the soprano Golda Schultz and various vocalists, and the Kammerakademie Potsdam, conducted by Antonello Manacorda. And this was released on April 12th, so it's getting a little old there. We finally got it on. I was thinking about this along with the Mozart and Strauss recording we did with Sabine Devielle a few weeks ago, and I wanted to do this one too, and it just got separated by a week. That one had Mozart Lieder, German Lieder, which are very rare. This one has some of the most famous arias that Mozart has ever written on it, so I feel like we've kind of completed the Taoist circle there. We've got like the whole Mozart art in here. Okay, so Golda Schultz, she's South African and studied music there before completing her training at the Juilliard School and the Opernstudio of Munich's Bayerische Staatsoper. The title is derived, Mozart, You Drive Me Crazy. It's derived from a comment that Schultz makes in the notes. She says, after so many years trying to get to grips with the essence of Mozart's work, I've come to understand that it reveals to me one very simple yet important conclusion. Trying to find the balance between the human and the divine is a pursuit of sheer madness. From this conclusion springs the purpose of this album, to show the madness for what it is, and to reveal the glorious attempt at this impossible balancing act. It's a pretty interesting premise. So anyway, I want to mention also in the booklet, there are a few typos in the listing for the soloists. I couldn't really keep track of everything. Simone Easthope sings Susanna on track 11, not track 21. I mean, there's no track 21 on the album. And I'll fill in the others as we go. There are a few other typos as well. All right, so the first three tracks come from Don Giovanni, which some people have called the greatest single work of art ever produced in Western culture. That's quite a statement. Yeah, you can't just dismiss it, that claim right away is the thing. It's such a great work, but it's a pretty lofty claim. Anyway, we start with quartet number 9, Non ti fidar o misera di quel ribaldo cor. And this features Golda Schultz as Donna Elvira. Other singers, Amitai Patti, the tenor, as Don Ottavio, and Simone Easthope as Donna Anna. She's a soprano. And there's also a Don Giovanni that's not listed. I'm going to guess that's Samuel Dale Johnson, the baritone. The notes don't say. Anyway, the first thing we hear is Schultz's solo voice, and it's got an appealing pureness to it, really perfect for Mozart. It's light, but with the possibility of heaviness. This is already a complicated ensemble piece with many voices. Pacing is on the slow side, but clarity of sound is amazing. Let's just hear a sample of this right away. I got to get out of that there. I got to say, that's a pretty elegant sounding recording and singing, especially when compared to the album cover, which features Golda Schultz making a rather goofy face with a little statuette of Mozart leaning against her head. So I'm not sure what the message is there, but it's an excellent recording, as you heard, with real warmth from the ensemble, especially the instrumental players. All the singers are excellent as well. The orchestra sounds great. It's a smallish ensemble that's large enough to make a sonic impact when necessary. The second track is Recitativo Accompagnato number 10, Don Ottavio son morta. Has Golda Schultz as Donna Anna and Amitai Patti, the tenor, as Ottavio. Again, he's not listed as the tenor in the notes, but I'm guessing it's him again. This is another dramatic scene. Here, Donna Anna discovers it was Don Giovanni who killed her father and attempted to rape her. This is a really serious opera. It's kind of like a comedy drama. There's a lot of drama in this particular recitative. It's a long setup in the aria to the next track. The orchestra is suitably dramatic here, as is Schultz herself. It's very appealing, and a very appealing voice. Very dramatic. Track 3, the aria, Ora sai chi l'onore. Golda Schultz as Donna Anna. A dramatic aria with a very high tessitura, in which Donna Anna asks Don Ottavio to avenge her. Let's sample the opening of this. Indeed, Donna Anna sounds a little bit on edge here, maybe a little crazy, as the title is, as you would be, listener. We can all relate to these characters. Schultz's ability with high drama is exciting. The voice is appealing, always beautiful tone, but suitably, there's iron will in it here too. It's an excellent performance. Tracks 4 through 5 are from Le Nozze di Figaro, which is probably my favorite Mozart opera. It's really charming. We start in track 4 with number 28, Recitativo, Giunse al fin il momento. Boy, I know these so well. I really like these, all of these, like recitatives and arias. This has Golda Schultz as Susanna, the maid who Figaro wants to marry. This recitative and aria are exceptionally sensual. The recitative sets up the dripping sensuality of the following aria, which is track 5, De vieni non tardar. Again, Golda Schultz as Susanna. The tempo here is on the fast side, and I feel like this quicker tempo takes a bit of the lingering sensuality of the aria away. Indeed, Schultz lets her beautiful tone do all the work, and doesn't pull out the sensuality in the curving melody. It's really a voluptuous melody. It's sort of like got a come-hither quality to the men who are listening. Anyway, the tempo is a bit too fast to really put this across. I'm going to give you like a sample so that you can see what I mean. Listen to older recordings of it. I remember, I believe Kirite Kanawa sang this and did it exceptionally well. She had a really nice light tone and was able to put that sensuality across. Schultz doesn't tend to shade her tone much for expressive purposes either. Track 6 to 8, Così fan tutte. This is the third of the 3 big Mozart operas, the 3 that Lorenzo da Ponte wrote the libretti for. And that's what we're going to hear on this album, just tunes from these 3 operas. Track 6, Recitativo, from Così fan tutte, Temerari sortite fuori di questo loco. Here, Golda Schultz is Fior di Ligi, one of the 2 sisters who are being seduced by the opposite boyfriends. They both have boyfriends, and the boyfriends disguise themselves and try to seduce the other's girlfriends so that to prove that they would be faithful, whether they'd be faithful or not. It's really a crazy story, and doesn't really end well for the characters involved. The opening indignant quality is done well in this aria. Indeed, this recitative sets up Fior di Ligi as like the rock she'll describe herself as in the next imperious aria. That's track 7, number 14, the aria Come un scoglio immorto resta. Like an immovable rock, I remain. Okay, so she's being seduced by her boyfriend's friend, and she's not gonna give in, all right? There's a story behind this aria that's pretty funny. That Fior di Ligi, this role, was originated by the soprano Adriana Ferrarese del Bene back in the 18th century. According to William Mann, Mozart didn't like her, though he thought highly enough of her singing. She was one of the great singers of the era. Mozart noticed that Ferrarese del Bene tended to drop her chin when singing low notes, so she'd put her chin down when the low notes came out, and then she'd throw her head back and look at the sky when singing high notes. So Mozart wrote this showpiece aria for her with continuous harmonic leaps built into it so that when she sang it, she would bob her head like a chicken. Well, modern sopranos don't do that, thankfully. And it really requires a spectacular display of vocal virtuosity to sing this. So everybody, of course, loves singing it. It's a real showstopper. Let's hear it from the minute 30-second mark, where we can hear that, so that those leaps in the vocal line. Oh, yeah. And Golda Schultz is excellent in this, too.
Yeah.
This is a really showstopper. Maybe the best performance on the album. Schultz does imperiousness well. Her solid tone comes across as unwavering here, and appropriately so. Beautiful legato singing when necessary, too. I really enjoyed her way with the final line of the aria. Track 8, Duetto, number 29, Fra gli amplessi in pochi istanti. So Golda Schultz is Fior di Legge again, and Amitai Patti, the tenor, is Fernando, the guy who's trying to seduce her, who is really her sister's boyfriend. You have to hear the opera to really get this. Some of these plots are really hard to put across in a brief description. Anyway, this is a lighter aria for Fior di Legge as she anticipates being with her lover, although it's actually her lover's friend in disguise. Patti's voice isn't front and center when he sings, and this is true in earlier numbers as well. I realize this is Schultz's show, but Patti has a big part, and he's also an important part of the aria. I have to say, Schultz isn't as expressive as she should be in the work's more tender moments. Tracks 9 and 10, back to Don Giovanni. We have a recitativo accompagnato, number 21b, In quali eccessi onumi. Here, Golda Schultz is Donna Elvira, and Donna Elvira is vengeful. She will have her revenge on Don Giovanni. And again, Schultz is really in her element in these types of roles. The recitative comes across with a lot of vocal power. I did like her gentler, self-reflective moment at the end of the recitative, sung with tenderness and care. Track 10 is the aria Mi tradi quest'alma ingrata. Here, Golda Schultz has a solo as Elvira, and Elvira sings her conflicted feelings toward Don Giovanni, so there's a lot of there's tenderness, and then there's that vengefulness as well. She's gentler here, but by now you're noticing we're hearing that same tone we've heard throughout the album, and I'm wishing she'd add some shading to it. Appealing in full, though it is. If we listen to these individually, I think we'll enjoy them a lot more. Let me just play a sample from this at the 1 minute mark. A more psychological moment there. Track 11 from Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro, the duet Canzonetta sull'aria, with Golda Schultz as the Contessa and Simone Easthope this time as Susanna. In this gorgeous duet, we hear Schultz now as the older and more mature Contessa, and I like Easthope's lighter soprano as Susanna, but again, she's not centered in the mix when she sings, and that's not right, especially with this melody that really sort of interweaves the two voices. It's really beautiful. I've heard this sung far more sensually and satisfyingly elsewhere. Let's give it a sample because I just really do love this aria so much. Yeah, and that aria, Susanna and the Contessa, the two women, have gotten together to try to lure the Count to meet Susanna, who he wants to have an affair with. Listen to the whole opera. I can't really explain the mechanics of this plot. Track 12, Così fan tutte, Sextetto, alla bella Despinetta vi presento amici miei. This is a big number with a lot of singers in it. Milan Siljanov, bass baritone, as Don Alfonso, Amitai Patti, the tenor, as Fernando, Samuel Dale Johnson, the baritone, as Guglielmo, Julie Rosette, soprano, as Despina, Golda Schultz as Fior di Legge, where we've heard her earlier, Ashley Dixon Santelli, mezzo-soprano, as Dorabella, the other sister. Oddly, Julie Rosette has the solo spotlight for much of this sextet as Despina. Schultz in this work sings in harmony with Ashley Dixon Santelli's lower voice, and it comes across grandly. Tracks 13 through 14, back to Le Nozze di Figaro. Track 13 is recitativo number 20, E Susanna non vien. Golda Schultz is the Contessa here. Schultz plays this with more of a desperate breathiness in her tone, which I was happy to hear because she hasn't changed her tone much. Contessa is more suited to her temperament than Susanna, I'd say. This brief recitative, though it has dramatic moments, serves to set up the gorgeous aria that follows, and that one is the heartbreaking, track 14, Dove sono I bei momenti. The Contessa recalls happier days with her husband in this heartbreaking aria. Again, this aria is taken at too quick a tempo for the heartbreak to register. Schultz sings it in a lovely legato, but it comes across as more prosaic than I've heard. The voice doesn't soften enough to get to the heart of the emotion. I want to sample this too, see if you agree. Yeah, Mozart's operas, they're comedies and there's a lot of comic material in them, but they're just these heart-stopping moments where you get these really deep emotions. It's really magical. These really are great works of art. Tracks 15 through 16, Così fan tutte. Track 15 is the recitativo, E parte senti. Golda Schultz as Fiordiligi. This is a brief recitative. Here, Fiordiligi is setting up her request for forgiveness for betraying her lover. And then in track 16 is that request, Per pietà, ben mio, perdona. If you remember my story about Mozart and the story of Ferrarese del Bene, you can only smile at the heartfelt asking for forgiveness because the line is very low in the soprano's range and rises to a high note, which would have been Ferrarese del Bene moving her head again. Let's listen to the opening of this. So it's tender. I don't know if I'd forgive her after this. Let me see. It's just not enough for me. I don't know. Schultz is actually more expressive here in her quieter lower range than you'd expect. The voice gives off some gentler emotion here, and I suspect Schultz relates to this character. She's probably played this on stage. It sounds like it. It sounds like she has some experience in the role. The high notes are floated at a piano dynamic at times and sound great. There's a light desperation to the phrasing that serves the text well. And then we have track 17, the final track on the album, which is the finale to Le Nozze di Figaro, Gente gente al armi. And I'm guessing that Golda Schultz is both Susanna and the Contessa here. Julie Rosette, soprano, is Barbarina. Ashley Dixon Santelli, mezzo-soprano, as Cherubino, and Martellina too. Pavel Horodisky, the bass, is Dr. Bartolo. Milan Silyanov, bass baritone, as Figaro, and Samuel Dale Johnson, baritone, as the Count. Amitai Pali is the tenor, is Curzio, and Basilio. So we get the album's entire ensemble together for this finale. Here, Schultz as the Contessa is the forgiver and softens admirably in her lines of forgiveness to the count. Let's hear that. Okay, the finale has one of the most joyous endings of any opera as the ensemble exhort each other to dance, play, and brighten up, and that's how the album ends. So, Golda Schultz is gaining notoriety in opera and vocal music, and her tone is well suited to Mozart. On this album, she fares a lot better in the more imperious moments of her characters, especially as Donna Elvira and as Fiordiligi in her stronger moments. Her strong projection puts across strength of mind. I have to say, though, in the gentler, more vulnerable moments, especially in those numbers from Le Nozze di Figaro as Susanna, the emotion doesn't come across as well. She's unwilling to color or shade her tone, and in the more sensitive numbers, tempos are taken at too fast a pace. I did find her more effective in Per pietà ben mio perdono from Così fan tutte. In fact, Fiordiligi seems a role tailored to her voice and temperament. So this is an album of hits and misses, really. All of the guest vocalists were very good, and I enjoyed the general sound and the recording, and the Kammerakademie Potsdam's sound was just warm and fantastic throughout. Antonello Manacorda keeps them light and flowing throughout. I'd say this is a recording for fans of Golda Schultz, especially.
You know, I'm not a huge opera fan myself, but I actually enjoyed this recording. I was listening to it kind of non-critically because I was cut short for listening time this week, so I had it on while I was walking to work. So I was out in nature, the sun was shining, and I was listening to this, and I thought it sounded really great. Schultz has real power and also nuance in her voice, and I like the tone color of her voice. Some sopranos fatigue me kind of quickly, but her sound has this fullness to it that's really pleasing even when she gets up high. And I thought the performances were spirited and energetic. The sound of the recording is really great all over.
I thought so,
I can
too.
see what you're saying about maybe in the performance itself, the nuance for some of the sadder emotions and the tempos could maybe be adapted a little bit more for matching that emotional effect. But overall, yeah, I think it's an uplifting and energetic recording.
Well, as far as opera goes, I'm not a huge opera fan, but I know these three operas really well because I've been listening to them since I was younger, really, from my college days on. And I've heard many singers sing them. And over the years, they've sort of gotten deeper in me as I've loved and lost myself, you know. So you kind of register those feelings more strongly. And I feel like this singer is a little too young to have registered some of these feelings yet. I don't know, especially the sadder ones. The imperious one, well, I think women are trained into that these days, so she does those really well.
I can really enjoy opera a lot more in a performance with the whole story and costumes and everything like that for me.
Yeah, and the Mozart ones go deep. They're really fantastic operas. If you're a newcomer to opera or to Mozart, I'd encourage you to hear those three operas. They're just fantastic, like peaks of Western culture, really, in any art form. All right, moving on. We're going to the composer Louise Farrenc, who we featured on the podcast before. And this is an album of chamber music. It's her clarinet trio, Opus 44, and her flute trio, Opus 45, and 2 brief piano works as well. The musicians are Maria Caturelli on flute, Livia Tancioni, clarinet, Livia de Romanis, cello, and Michele Tozzetti, piano. Yeah, they're all Italian. And this is on the Da Vinci Classics label again, who we've been featuring quite a bit lately. I just saw all these releases, and I'm like, wow, we're going to have to do these. They had a lot of them in the last few weeks. This was released on April 26th. Anyway, Louise Farrenc liked to experiment with rare or unusual combinations of instruments, and we have 2 such timbrely experimental works here. Farrenc, if you've heard our earlier recordings, worked in the period that Beethoven was really dominant. And though she was a woman, and people say, oh, well, women didn't get a fair hearing, really during Beethoven's dominance, really no one did. And that's why we don't know the music of Johann Nepomuk Hummel or Ignaz Moscheles very well either, because they were just under Beethoven's shadow, although their music was very good as well. Anyway, here we have some pretty quirky works from Farrenc, although actually they're not quirky works. They're quirky.
I didn't think so, yeah.
Yeah, they're quirky as far as the instrumentation goes, but the performances are a bit unusual in their sound, and I want to talk about this a little bit. First, we have the Clarinet Trio in E-flat major, opus 44. And this displays the influence of Carl Maria von Weber, among the first composers to discover the expressive potential of the clarinet, along with Mozart, who wrote 3 very famous and successful clarinet works toward the end of his life. The first movement, Andante, moving to Allegro moderato. So the Andante would be the introduction, and the Allegro moderato would be the sonata form part. Listen to the beginning of this. First of all, we need to put ourselves into this sound world here, because the sound these instruments make are a little different than what we're used to. Now, I don't know if you can hear in there, this really does have like a Beethoven sort of shape to it, and there's an aggression to it, but we're not hearing that aggression in this performance. It is in there, it can be pulled out if the musicians want to. I did like the hoarse cello opening to this work. Now, the cello is recorded all the way in the right channel, and the clarinet is all the way in the left with the piano in the middle, which I thought was a little odd. The cello actually sounds like it's creaking a bit. It sounds like a very old instrument. But it's not, I don't think. The clarinet plays a theme after that with that lovely smooth tone. It sounds like the piano here is a forte piano, but it's not. It's, in fact, a C. Bechstein Model B of 1899, so a piano Brahms would have known. And it's previously owned by Nicola Rescigno, according to the inlay card on the CD. I looked up a photo of it, and it's far from a modern concert grand. It's pretty small, stretching to about 6 feet, I'd guess. It's not terribly resonant, which sort of surprised me, and is recorded on the dry side. It has an appealing presence. In this work, the clarinet is coming across as the star, despite the fact that the instruments are equal. Tancioni's tone draws the ear to her. The piece itself sounds like the Beethoven era of classical music. Sections are shaped beautifully and proportionally. At 2 minutes and 54 seconds, we go directly into a development section. The piece itself is appealing, but there's a creaky quirkiness to the sound, which I personally find appealing and rather refreshing. It's very different than what we would normally hear. The instruments all sound so different from each other in timbre that every bit of the musical development is easily followed. Also, hearing this in headphones, the instruments sound like they're spaced very far apart from each other, so they're easy to kind of pull out that way too. There's no real kind of, the clarinet, you don't hear like an echo of it in the right channel. It's completely in the left channel, as is the cello in the right, which I find a bit strange. It's sort of like those old 1950s jazz recordings, where they would just put like one instrument in one channel. I think I would have liked a bit more central placing for both the clarinet and the cello. The piano is squarely in the center, as I said. The movement has a gentle flow to it that's well conveyed by these musicians. There's an odd key change right at the end of the movement in the coda, after which it quickly rebalances and heads to a final cadence. And I want to say that the approach that these musicians use makes you register every sudden key change or just odd little turn in the work to more of an extent than you would if it was really like being played at a more driven pace. There's lots of room ambience on the final chord as it fades out. Track 2, the second movement, Adagio, and here we have lovely legato playing from the rather distant-sounding cello. The way it's recorded, we don't get much thickness of tone. As I said earlier, it sounds creaky and rather quirky, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's just an impression. I'm just trying to find words to describe this rather unusual sound. The clarinet plays the theme beautifully, and the fortepiano, or really the piano, it's not a fortepiano. It does sound like one, though, to me. The piano has a very short sustain, nevertheless, and it introduces the next section of the melody, and I'm going to play that. This is from about the 1 minute and 20 second mark. You know, I'd really like to be in the room with this piano to hear what it sounds like in its presence. Because I feel like the recording is doing something to it. It's altering its sound in some way, just by the way it's recorded. The section at 2 minutes and 25 seconds speeds up a bit as the clarinet plays the next theme. The theme comes back at 4 minutes and 15 seconds in the piano, which adds a few trills and sounds rather appealing in the gentle guise it takes on here. The third movement is a minuetto. This is track 3. The piano opens with a staccato line that's rather comical with this timbre. I like the way the clarinet and cello sound when they play in unison. Farrenc provides some sudden odd harmonies, occasionally leading to new keys, which also produces an appealing light shock when it occurs. The work finds its way back to the opening theme, which brings us to the end of the movement, and then the fourth movement is an allegro. Here the cello virtually scrapes its way through this movement with a raspy sound that, again, I'm really taking to. It's really not the cello sound that you normally think of, that full throaty kind of sound. The opening theme is appealing. Let's listen to it. Actually, it is the opening theme, but it's later on in the movement when it's repeated. Yeah, some appealing, tricky, avoidances of the cadence there. This cello sounds like it's been smoking its whole life. It's kind of got that sort of raspy voice or something. The opening is a rondo theme, and the movement moves through several dramatic moments in between its return. Track 5 is a scherzo in B-flat major for solo piano, opus 47. It's got a grand opening on the very dry-sounding keyboard. All sustain is created by the pedaling. There's a thump to the bass end of the instrument, and the action is light enough to allow some virtuosic lines to register. The piece peters out to a pianissimo by the 2 minute and 15 second mark, then the grand opening repeats. Michele Tozzetti's ability with the instrument is impressive. I think we're hearing an honest recording of the sound this instrument makes due to the dry acoustic, although I bet it's louder in real life if I were in the room with it. The instrument nevertheless resonates well. Tracks 6 through 9 are the Flute Trio in E minor, opus 45. Track 6, the first movement, is again an introduction and then the main sonata part, Allegro deciso, moving to più moderato ed espressivo. This starts interestingly with cadential chords. On this track we hear the rich sound of the flute, which sounds again like a period instrument, but seems to be a modern metal flute from the photos. Maria Caturelli gives her tone a breathy sound, and combined with the thin-sounding cello and the relatively quiet fortepiano, the entire sound comes across as charming and is much less aggressive than it would in a modern instrumental ensemble. although this is that, I don't really know what to say about this, really. The piano has such a gentle sound, it sounds like it could only suggest aggression rather than be aggressive. Let's sample the gentle second theme of the sonata from the 1 minute and 15 second mark, which suits these instrumental timbres perfectly. Man, this is an extremely dry sounding recording. Okay, with the rather soft attack of all the instruments, we're listening more for thematic material rather than dynamics or attack. The piano's frequent repeating chords come across as pretty rather than urgent. Now, you could say that the work's emotions aren't being fully put across, but I'd say that this ensemble is exposing an entirely different layer of expression in the work, one that would be covered up by a more aggressive and more modern performance, or rather a more glossy performance. Track 7, the second movement, Andante, has a lovely opening on flute and fortepiano. Let's hear that. It's really nice. All three of these musicians have a really exquisite way with the melodic material. They really put the melody across well. The melody here is charming and charmingly played. For the repeat of the theme at around the minute and 30 second mark, the cello comes in with a counter melody to the flute. The next section has a more stomping rhythmic aggression to it, and this comes across as a rondo with the opening theme returning. But perhaps it's just a simple ABA. Track 8, the third movement, Scherzo. Here the piano opens up with a rhythmic figure that's played for its melodic qualities. The flute and cello come in after that. I'm going to sample the opening of this movement. Again, details register beautifully in this clear recording, though I think the instruments are very distant from the microphones here. And these instruments are very sepia-toned, if you know what I mean. The B section starts in the cello at the 1 minute and 11 second mark. The scherzo section repeats. Then at the end, we get a surprise return to the more lyrical middle section before it's interrupted for one final statement by the scherzo theme. Track 9 is the fourth movement, Presto. Here, a traveling piano line underpins the melodic material in the upper instruments. Most of Michele Tozzetti's piano lines come across as staccato, as does this one. The melody itself is charming, and we get a charming second melody from the flute at the minute and 30 second mark, which I will sample. And that's about as solid as a cadence as you're ever going to get. After a pause, we're off to a new contrasting section, but still with that wandering staccato piano line underneath. The main theme returns at the end with a coda leading to the final cadence after a few teases. Overall, this is an enjoyable work. Track 10, Impromptu in B minor for piano. This has polyphony combined with romantic expressivity. We hear some of that polyphony at the beginning. Tozzetti is careful to have the melody in the high end stand out, accenting its notes. Let's sample this. I haven't done any of the solo piano works on this album yet. And we're getting pretty close to the midway point of the entire work. It's odd, on this instrument the work sounds older than its composition date, yet the piano was made long after. This work is rather brief and a charming ending to an unusual sounding and very enjoyable album. Alright, this is a pretty quirky recording. I'll say that this has a period instrument sound, even though these aren't period instruments really, and an approach of works that are straightforwardly composed in a later classical style, but are experimental due to their odd timbral combinations. I guess flute and clarinet together with cello and piano would have been an odd thing back in the day. There's nothing glossy or high-octane about this set of performances. The rather rickety sound and keyboard action available on the Bechstein piano make any such approach impossible. I think the sound of the instruments is what makes this album special and even unique. I'm not sure this sort of thing has been done with Louise Farrenc's music yet. To me, her chamber works and her symphonic works too come across as very Beethoven-inspired. I've only heard her music in glossy performances on modern instruments until this recording. The intimacy we get on these rather rickety-sounding instruments gives the works a lot of vulnerable appeal. I hear great sensitivity in them. These performances could have been very different if performed on modern instruments. We would have gotten a bigger sound and more aggression, which is in fact present in the works themselves. But I think we should be grateful to have this recording. It's really unique and brings out qualities in the music that we won't hear elsewhere. I think anyone interested in Farrenc's music, or music by women composers in general, needs to hear this. We won't hear a recording like this again, I think. There's a lot to inspire future recordings here.
They're very well played. The music itself is not so surprising to me. It's well within the idiom of the time, and they're pleasant compositions. I think I preferred the flute trio. I particularly like the first movement. The beginning in the minor key is kind of edgy and aggressive. The charm of the recording to me is the unique instrumentation, as you mentioned, that sort of range differential between the clarinet, or especially the flute, and the cello. So you have this big gap, and the interaction between the two instruments makes it kind of interesting. So I enjoyed that tonal combination that we don't really hear usually in classical music. Now the recording itself is very clear. You can hear everything in detail. However, it is so super dry, as you mentioned. It sounds like a padded, soundproofed rehearsal room. You know, there's no ambiance or room sound at all really here. And just a little bit of room sound and sustain may have livened things up a little bit in this recording. There's no problem with clarity. And as you say, the instrument sound is rather unique too. So combining that with the very dry sound quality makes for an interesting presentation. I'm not sure if that's entirely what was intended or that's just what happened with the recording, but it makes it have a unique result.
Yeah, you gotta wonder, maybe they got lucky. I don't know. I could see critics panning this album just because of the overall sound. But I rather was taken by it. It just sounded different to me, and I really liked that.
It sounds intimate in the way that it sounds like music sounds when you're actually in a room where people are playing it, you know, in a rehearsal or something like that.
Well, I guess if they're in three separate spaces, though, because the instruments sound very far away from each other.
Yeah, in the mix, right.
Yeah. All right, well, anyway, I recommend it anyway. I think you should hear more of it. I thought it was an interesting exploration of these works. Our third classical recording, the contemporary composer, always here to remind you that classical music is still happening, is by an American composer, Christopher Alan Schmitz, and this is a new name to me. He was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1972, that bastion of American music.
Yeah.
We could say that almost about any composer born in America, really. This album features his Violin Concerto and Symphony No. 1, and they're played by Amy Schwartz Moretti on the violin. And we also hear London Voices, London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Stefan Sanderling. This is on Navona Records and was released on May 10th, so it's pretty recent. I'd like to thank Chelsea Cornago, the publicity manager at Parma Recordings, for information on the compositions. There's no year of composition given on the website, but Chelsea got in touch with the composer for me and informed me that both of the works were composed in 2023, so the year that the recording was made. And that's quite a feat, because these are two pretty big works. I have to say, he really, Mr. Schmitz really does have a lot of ideas. And these works are both full of really interesting and fresh ideas, especially melodically. Yeah, I was pretty surprised by this. It really took me right away. Let's get into the Violin Concerto, the first work on the album. This is tracks 1 through 3. In the Violin Concerto, each movement depicts a different emotional tone, which is indicated by its title. The first movement on track 1 is called Dark. And let's hear a little bit of Dark. And this is a pretty long lined violin line, so I can't really get it to its end. The violin line sounds like it's going somewhere, and then you're just hooked on it. You're really listening to it right from the very beginning. And that's nice to hear, because that's not always the case in contemporary music. So those violin lines, they're two-note motifs, one questions, one answers, and the harp note punctuation always kind of draws me in too. I like that sound a lot. At 1 minute and 14 seconds, the orchestra adds more sudden fortissimi, suddenly bringing up the level of drama in the movement. This is followed by a sudden retreat to pianissimo and some icy sounds. The violin then starts a new theme that's got a brief sort of cadenza quality to it. Orchestration is colorful. The work has a late romantic and early modernist quality to it. And the writing for the solo violin is miraculously all-appealing and memorable. What I mean by late romantic, early modernist is that it's extremely melodic, and the orchestration, the modernist part, would be the orchestra color, is also a very important part of it. The romantics, they colored with the orchestra, but once we got to Rimsky-Korsakov and after him, Stravinsky, Debussy, the timbres of the orchestra were really started to get important. I'm going to play another section for you. This is from the 3 minute and 15 second mark. Thump, thump, thump. It's kind of really compelling. There's a wealth of appealing melodic material in this movement, and it's hard to know what to sample, really. There are a lot of things going on. I'm going a bit overboard, but I'm going to sample one more section just to give just one more idea of some of the variety you'll hear. Yeah, I was a little overwhelmed by the wealth of ideas in this movement. I'm giving you samples of appealing sections, but the larger appeal of this movement is hearing how it all flows together. At the end of the 6th minute, the rhythm starts waltzing, but quickly changes to 4/4, then back to triplets. We get something almost cinematic from the orchestra in the 7th minute, and in the 9th, there's some nifty bow work from Moretti as she skips through a dotted rhythm section, bouncing the bow off the strings for effect. A more melodic section follows, then a big tension build-up over a long period of time. Yeah, in fact, the orchestral textures just keep changing, as does the rhythm, and the whole entire feel that's put across. What we wind up at is a cadenza at the 11 minute and 38 second mark of a completely different character to the aggressive rhythm we've been hearing. It's a highly lyrical and lamenting in tone. It's rather a surprise. Most of the cadenza is double stopped. The violinist comes out of the cadenza in an anxious state, playing rapidly and building up tension with a run to an end that's taken with a surprisingly sudden muted quality. The second movement is marked warm and is a romanza. This has a broad, gauzy string harmony at the beginning, sounding harmonically like something from the early 20th century, and again, playing a melody that's ear-catching. There's a dusky quality to it. Let's hear it. There's a little bit of bar talk to the orchestration and a little bit of golden age of American song, bluesy kind of quality to the melody. The violin comes in at about the minute and 20-second mark, repeating the melody the strings played or something closely related to it. We get to hear Moretti's tone in her long sustained notes, and it's got a warm quality. At the 3 minute and 30-second mark, the woodwinds take over in a rather lovely fashion, and I want you to hear this too, because I thought this was pretty magical. Now, I've been playing all this orchestration, but rest assured there is a solo violin in this movement. We did hear a little bit of it towards the end there. The movement provides some sonically interesting backdrops for the violin to play over, as though the violin itself is a bird traveling through changing landscapes. I think it's the frequent use of the violin's higher range that gives me that image. In the 7th minute, there's a grand statement by the orchestra, again, cinematic in sound and scope. This suddenly quietens to thin, sustained string chords as the violin takes over with its theme and soars high in its range, serenely and quietly. The movement ends inconclusively on a natural fade of an unresolved harmony. And then we get the third movement labeled Electric, track 3. This quick triplet rhythm propels the solo violin line. Let's hear it. The violin line straightens into something less rhythmic and more sustained for periods. Then we'll often go back to highlighting the opening triplet rhythm. It's a fairly brief movement at about 5 minutes and relies mostly on string patterns for drive. The excitement builds to the end where the violin is given some quick, exciting patterns before we reach the final chord. And I'd like to just play that ending for you as well. Oh, yeah. I have to say, I do wish the violin had a little more presence on the recording, but it is audible and it does come across very excitingly. Tracks 4 through 8, Symphony No. 1, Land of the Free. Now, this work has a bit of a program to it, or a bit of an idea behind it, maybe. The work speaks of a tenuous state of American freedom in which our delicate equilibrium of checks and balances struggles to endure, according to the composer. He says, in this modern era of social media, perception supersedes reality, and the immediacy of online dialogue encourages provocation over critical inquiry. The symphony's 5 movements depict an emotional journey through this reality, feelings of resilience, confusion, dread, love, anger, sadness, desperation, and ultimately hope. The work ends with an increasingly desperate prayer for peace. Now, you might be saying to yourself, wow, this piece could have been written yesterday. Well, it almost was. It was written in 2023. Yeah. And the experience is still very present for us in the world, really, not just for people in America, but for us Americans abroad as well, and probably for everyone. It's a 5-movement work, I should mention. Track 4, the first movement, is called Threads of Resilience. All of these movements have compelling descriptive titles that nevertheless make one wonder what specifically the composer is referring to. This movement starts solemnly with brass chords and a solo brass melody by a lower instrument. I'm not sure if it's a trombone or a French horn. The strings then come across with gentle strains and a bit of a serene, wide-open feel to them. And I'm going to sample this from the 1 and 20-second mark. There's some gentle metal percussion in there as the flute plays a melody, and a clarinet comes in to provide a counter melody. We hear a full, effusive orchestra at around the 3-minute mark and a build-up to a new key. The music quickly quietens, and the movement ends on a clarinet theme. Track 5 is the second movement, called Shadow Empire. This movement starts gently with the harp strumming chords, with strains of melody peeking out of the woodwinds. There are interesting timbral combinations and sound techniques in the orchestral accompaniment to the foregrounded material. Brass get a big part in the next, more aggressive section after the 1 and 30-second mark, and the percussion ratchets up the threat even more shortly afterwards. Let's sample this from about the 1 and 30-second mark. Yeah, that sort of summarizes what I feel like when I'm on Facebook. What I'm enjoying most about Schmitz's music are the timbral combinations, often playing 2 counter themes at the same time. The melodies are all memorable as well. Another tension-filled build-up is heard moving to the 4-minute mark. In the 5th minute, we get some icy metallic chiming from the percussion that leads to swelling chords and a new section. These are really hard to keep track of in narrative, which is why we have music, so I'm going to encourage you to hear this for yourself. The new section furthers the aggressive percussion, which provides the peak tension of a movement each time they appear. In fact, this whole movement just sort of connects together really well. You need to hear it for yourself. The bit at the 7-minute and 22-second mark with the breathy quarter note winds reminds me a bit of a Sibelius landscape in its sparse evocation of space. The movement basically goes back and forth between the quiet and slightly dark and the openly aggressive. It ends on a tension-filled, quietly fading chord. Track 6 is the 3rd movement, Viral Veil. The clarinet opens this with bassoon and then other winds and strings coming in fugue theme style. It's a brief movement after the longer 2nd movement and is pretty restless itself. There's a fortissimo outburst before the 1st minute and some sinister forward movement from the orchestra afterwards. I'm going to sample this from around the 1-minute and 10-second mark. The movement makes a brief arch by diminishing from here and doing a natural diminuendo down to the opening clarinet, from which it does a natural fade. Track 7 is the 4th movement, Sins of Inaction. This starts with an outburst, the biggest in the piece so far. Let's hear that. Maybe you want to turn your volume down a little bit before you hear this. The section plays out with some remorse heard, as we heard the beginning of, but toward the end, at around the 2-minute and 50-second mark, there's a tense build-up that acts like a memory of the opening outburst. A calm section follows and builds up again to that always returning heavy percussion. The movement ends on a speeding up of tempo, sounding frantic. Track 8 is the 5th and final movement, Whispered Prayers, and we also hear the text of the Agnus Dei in this from the Catholic Mass. This movement practically connects to the previous one, though the other has a clear ending. The oboe starts with the plaintive opening theme. At the 54-second mark, we hear a chorus singing the Agnus Dei. Let's hear the entry of the chorus at that point. There's a really beautiful serenity to the entry of the chorus and to the chords it sounds. I really enjoyed that a lot. It sounds sincere, calm, and confident. The choir is heard in full force at the 2-minute and 50-second mark, which is coming up, with some explosive rolled percussion bursts. By the 4th minute, the harmony becomes a bit Ligeti-esque, sort of like the quarter tone sounds of his Lux Aeterna, but there are no quarter tones here. The overall sound is similar, though. In the 5th minute, the Agnus Dei singing sounds positively church-like, but takes a turn toward the anxious with a simple change of chords at around the 5-minute and 30-second mark. It's a nice moment, very dramatic and unexpected. In the 6th minute, we hear distant chiming percussion, and the Agnus Dei vocals return, building up gradually to a crescendo. The triumphant words burst out fortissimo at 7 minutes and 11 seconds. It decrescendos from there, giving a sense of hope to an ending as the decrescendo brings the music all the way down to silence. These are 2 compelling works by a composer who's new to me, and that's what makes doing this podcast so rewarding. Christopher Alan Schmitz writes in a late Romantic, early modernist idiom, meaning he's more in Mahler's harmonic territory than Stravinsky or Schoenberg's, maybe even closer to Rachmaninoff. And he manages to come up with themes that keep the listener engaged. This is especially true in the Violin Concerto, where there are so many interesting themes and orchestral colors that I really couldn't keep up with them all, though I certainly enjoyed having them all wash over me. The symphony is a work with more of a message and comes across with some darkness to it, despite its being highly listenable with equally interesting timbral combinations. Schmitz has a good sense of symphonic form in both works. The listener feels led along a well-planned path toward the end of the works. Excellent recording quality, too, from Navona Records. They've captured the orchestral sound and detail well. This is an album and a composer worth discovering, another American composer to keep an ear out for.
Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. Schmitz's music has a lot of elements from late Romantic composers that I really like. It's kind of cinematic with rich uses of timbres, but unlike some contemporary orchestral composers' works we've heard recently, he doesn't create only soundscapes. The music is always headed in a direction through strong development of ideas. Melodic phrases carry you from one idea to the next, and his sense of harmony balances tensions with arrivals on sweet and rich harmonies. There's lots of powerful brass and percussion that I always love, and it's a great sounding recording too. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of his compositions.
Okay, we're on to jazz, and this was a really enjoyable, interesting 3 albums as well.
Over on the jazz side, we're going to start out with some trumpet. On the Cellar Live label, we've got Thai trumpeter Win Pongsakorn with his recording Time Has Changed. Came out May 3rd. Win Pongsakorn Lertvanitsutha was born in Bangkok, Thailand. He started playing trumpet at age 11. In 2014, he completed his bachelor's degree with first honors. In 2015, he was accepted to study jazz trumpet performance for undergraduate study with Jim Rotundi at the University of Music and Performing Arts Graz, Austria. 2017, after he graduated his second bachelor's degree, he continued his graduate study and completed his master's degree in jazz trumpet performance in 2019. In 2020, he released his debut album, Yes It Is, introducing Win Pongsakorn, his first album as a leader on Cellar Live as well. And in 2021, his album appeared on Jazz Week chart top 100 jazz albums for the year. So on this recording, Win Pongsakorn on trumpet, David Hazeltine on piano, one of our favorite pianists, Paolo Benedettini on double bass, Jason Brown on drums, musical director Jim Rotundi, who also wrote the notes for the recording on Cellar Live, executive producer Corey Weeds, and produced by Jim Rotundi. This was recorded at Green Lobster Studios March 6, 2023, engineered by Richard Tretzel, mixed and mastered by Stefano Amerio. And the recording's gonna get going with Man in the Mirror by Glenn Ballard and Cydia Garrett from 1987. Yeah, that's right. It's a Michael Jackson tune. It sounds nice with this light arrangement and a swing groove with a click on beat 2 from Brown. Let's hear it get going into the chorus that I'm sure everyone will recognize. As you can hear, Pongsakorn has a warm, fluffy tone and relaxed phrasing. Let's pop back in to hear some of his improvised solo later on in the tune. Nice agility and melodic lines with triplet figures and double-time phrases. Hazelton gets a solo on this one too, with some fleet lines and cute high bluesy figures into rhythmic chords before Pongsakorn is back for another run through the melody. Track 2, a Pongsakorn original, Pensri. This is a waltzing tune with a good sense of motion. There are 64 measures of melody with a recurring phrase in the trumpet line that gets stuck in your ear. And I like how Benedettini's bass changes up from snappy figures to repeated notes. Let's hear this one get going. After the melody, Pongsakorn continues on into an improvised solo over the changing rhythms, and let's hear some of Hazeltine's tasty solo on this tune. Pongsakorn's back with the melody and some final fluttery improvisations to a soft rhythm section ending. Track 3, also an original by Pongsakorn, Hummingbirds at Balata Garden, which I guess is a garden on the Isle of Martinique in the French West Indies. This is a happy-sounding tune with a bossa beat. There's a 4-measure intro and a 32-measure trumpet melody over interesting chord changes. Let's check it out. Hazelton's off for a solo from there. Pongsakorn follows with a melodic solo with snappy rhythmic phrases, and Benedettini gets a bass solo on this tune, so let's check out some of his playing later on in the tune. Back to the melody from there with a little outro that recalls the intro, and Brown's light Latin beat on the drums is really great throughout this tune. Track 4, the title track, Time Has Changed, Pongsakorn original, has a slow longing melody with phrases exchanged between trumpet and bass. It's kind of an A-B-A form, but the B and the last A are 9 measures instead of 8. Maybe that's how the time has changed. Let's take a listen. To the A section of the melody there. Pongsakorn is up for a solo after that, and this one has some playful half-valve work and bluesy tastes in it, so let's have a little listen. Hazelton follows with a piano solo, showing off a delicate touch and some contrasting percussive chords, and Pongsakorn's back from the B and the final A sections of the melody to finish it up.
I want to say about that track, too, the beginning kind of has a distant sort of kinship to the Miles Davis's So What, because it has that da.
Yeah, I noticed that, too. Track 5, another Pongsakorn original, Caipirinha, which I guess is a Brazilian cocktail. Hazelton switches to electric piano for this one that has a kind of fun boogaloo feel to it. The structure is interesting. There's a 6-measure intro, then a repeating 20-measure melody that has 16 and 4-measure sections, then a final 4 measures that's like the intro but without the last phrase repeat. Let's check it out. Yeah, what a fun melody. Hazelton has a fun electric piano solo first, but let's hear some of Pongsakorn's bluesy and playful trumpet solo here. Yeah, some nice false fingering and interval fun there. Benedettini has a bendy bass solo too that has snappy rhythms, and it ends up with one more time through the 20-measure melody and outro section. Mike, will you still love me tomorrow?
Oh, I remember this song.
After all the mixing of the podcast episode is done.
I'll still remember this song, though, once it's...
That's right.
when we hear it again in 20 years, I guess.
Carole King and Jerry Goffin wrote this tune, which was a hit for the Shirelles in 1960. An interesting choice. The charm of this is the contrast between the warm-toned, relaxed phrase trumpet melody from Pongsakorn and the busy rhythm section that switches up the feels between 6 and 4, which is marked out in Brown's cymbals. Let's check some of it out. Can't make it all the way through the melody, Mike, because pop songs actually had bridges back in 1960 still.
Those were the days.
Pongsakorn's solo on this one is playful and agile, as is Hazeltine's, with a sense of unpredictability and some bluesy licks. Track 7, You're Getting to Be a Habit with Me, Harry Warren, Al Dubin, a 1932 popular song. It appeared in the Warner Brothers musical film 42nd Street. Pongsakorn blows this one with a harmon mute, and it features some good drumming from Brown, starting out on brushes and switching up to a chugging swing with sticks. Listen for the Charlie Parker 1951 Loverman version, ending quote just before 2 minutes in Pongsakorn's solo. Hazeltine has a solo, and Brown gets some drum action before the final melody section when Pongsakorn returns. Track 8, Theme for Ernie. This is a tune by Fred Lacey, first recorded on John Coltrane's 1958 Soul Train album. This one has a classy solo piano opening from Hazeltine and shows off Pongsakorn's lyrical playing on the melody. Benedettini gets the first solo on bass with good melodic lines. Nice solos from Pongsakorn and Hazeltine as well over the relaxed tempo. Track 9, Imagination. Charles Stepney, Maurice White, and Philip Bailey. Yes, that's Earth, Wind, and Fire from their Spirit album, 1976. Another interesting choice and arrangement. Pongsakorn gives it a singing quality over the light, clicky pop beat from Brown. Let's hear it get going. Let's come back for some of Pongsakorn's solo that has snappy lines in it. Hazelton has a solo as well that mixes easy flowing melodic lines and punchy chords. And the recording ends up with a Hazelton original, Pearls. It's an exciting original tune. After an 8-measure intro with a cool ostinato bass figure, the 32-measure repeating melody is handled in unison by both trumpet and piano and has speedy lines and rhythm change-ups between Latin and swing. Let's hear it go one time around. And there's a repeat there. Let's pop in and check some of Hazelton's playing over his own tune a little bit further on. Pongsakorn has a speedy and agile solo on this one too, and Brown gets some tight drumming excitement with band interjections before they get back to the melody once more. Pongsakorn's an interesting trumpeter. He has a warm, full tone, great technique and agility, and a natural sense of melody in his solos that also have a fun sense of playfulness. The program here is interesting and varied, with a standard, a jazz classic cover, and unique originals from Pongsakorn and Hazelton, but the surprise is the neat treatment of unexpected pop tunes from the past by the Shirelles, Michael Jackson, and Earth, Wind and Fire. Hazelton is classy and inventive as always, and Benedettini and Brown keep it tight and largely light with their own spots to shine through. A trumpeter to definitely keep an ear on in the future for sure.
Yeah, you used the word classy several times when you were talking about these tracks, and that was my overall kind of adjective to sum up the album. I thought it was a really classy album, and I especially thought the piano playing on the album was spacious and classy, although I thought Pongsakorn's playing was as well.
Right.
This album has kind of a chilled out, after hours kind of feel to it, yet the players managed to find inventive ways to fill the space and mostly accent that space too. Pongsakorn himself likes to set an atmosphere with his playing, going for solos that have a good solid tone and play off the melody for the most part. The piano often follows him in this mode. I think this album is spacious above all. The players' pause is communicating along with their actual playing. That's part of the playing, of course. It's a straightforward jazz album with slow to mid-tempo tracks, very inoffensive. It sounds like seeing Pongsakorn would be a well-spent night out, and this album certainly invites the desire to go out and hear him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this playing. Yeah, playful is a good word for him, too.
Yeah, he has a good sense of humor, too. Yeah. All right, time for some flute. Fernando Brox, with his new recording on Fresh Sound New Talent label, came out May 3rd. From Within. Born in Malaga, Spain in 1988, Brox started in classical music before he turned to jazz and modern styles. He began his studies at age 8, and he graduated in 2010 from the Higher Conservatory of Malaga. He's recorded 4 albums as a leader since 2018, and in 2019 he received a higher degree in jazz flute, the ESEM Taller de Musics. As a teacher, Brox has taught flute, harmony, combo, music, language, and he's been the director of the big band at the Taller de Musics Escola from 2015 to 2021. He currently lives in Switzerland, where he's enjoying a scholarship to complete a master's in composition under the direction of Maestro Guillermo Klein. On this recording, Fernando Brox on flute and all compositions, Wilfred Wild on guitar, Ioannis Obios on piano, Nadav Ehrlich on bass, and Iago Fernandez on drums. This was recorded at Jazz Campus, Basel, November 1st and 2nd, 2023. The rhythm section here, Ioannis Obios on piano, has a trio on his own with Fernandez and Ehrlich, and last year they released their own album, Para Mi Friends, so they should be a tight working unit on their own. And now adding Brox on top on the flute. The sound engineer on the recording, Sam Barnett, mastered by Mario G. Alberni at California Mastering, mixed by Vincent Perez. The recording starts out with a tune called Cuckoo, that's K-U-K-U. It starts out with a 24-measure introduction. There's a repeating 3-measure descending ostinato bass figure and sprinkled piano figures and chords over tight drum brushes. The melody is taken in unison by flute and guitar. It's a long construction that seems to be 44 measures or so. Let's hear it get going. There's another shorter melody section that gets a brief stop time feel and launches Brox into his flute solo. And let's check out some of that solo with great varied articulation and a nice bass pulse underneath. Wild follows with a guitar solo. I like his phrasing with a good sense of space. We hear the melody sections again, and then it gets a little amorphous other than the constant bass lines. Guitar and flute have some improvised textures into improvisations from Obio's piano that gets some accented figures for backing from flute and guitar to the end. Track 2 is The Bagpiper, 4 measures of drums bring in the fast-paced melody handled with agility by unison guitar and flute. Seems to be 48 measures in total. The first half has repeating sections of speedy lines, then it becomes more rhythmic with descending lines and slower syncopated figures. Wild emerges out of that with a guitar solo. Let's check it out. Obios has an energetic piano solo on this tune, and so let's check out a little bit of that. Brox's flute solo is quite acrobatic in this one, and Wilde joins back in and it vamps on the descending figures we heard before, with Fernandez gradually working up some drum excitement into a final melody segment and some improvised flute and guitar to the ending. Track 3, Kalahari, guess after the desert. Ehrlich starts it out on solo bass with clearly articulated ringing lines. Obios adds some sparse piano and Brox adds high flute notes and then some breathy tones. Guitar comes in too. It's ben rubato, but Ehrlich gradually establishes a steady bass line rhythm for a guitar and flute melody to float over. Obios has an extended piano solo and Brox follows on flute. Listening to the bass, it sounds like alternating measures of 6 and 7 beats. Let's hear some of Brox's flute solo over this interesting rhythmic feel. Wilde joins back in on a melody line with Brox that gets more animated with subdivided drumming from Fernandez. It gets quieter and mysterious to a dissipated ending. Track 4 is Blue Clouds, an interesting even 6/8 feel for this tune. It has a 16-measure rhythm section intro. The flute and guitar melody is a 32-measure A-B construction with contrasting busier B sections. Brox is off on a solo from there, mixing some exploration of the harmonies and outside lines with some bluesy touches. This is a really cool solo, so let's check out a little bit of it. Oboes has a piano solo next with searching lines and ripples, and Ehrlich gets the subdivided bass going again to bring back another time through the A and B melody sections. The groove settles in for some final flute improvisations from Brock's to a chilled-out ending. Track 5 is Fellowship. This has a melody of a lot of rising guitar and flute lines that push ahead with syncopation. It creates an uplifting feeling. It's around 40 measures, but it sounds like there are a few measures with 3 beats instead of 4 that create more anticipation. Brock's and Oboes exchange solo sections and phrases, Brock's sounding fluttery, with quick turns like a butterfly in flight, and Wild gets some improvisations as well before joining with the flute again for a final melody section. Track 6, Satanic Affair. There's a title for you. This is a fun 6/8 12-bar blues. The bass and drums take it around once. Flute, guitar, and piano come in for a round, and on the repeat, the piano has some fun rhythmic repeated notes. Let's check it out. Brock's is off soloing from there. His flowing lines are really free. Oboes has a lot of rhythmic fun in his piano solo on this one, but let's check out Wild's guitar solo on this tune. Ehrlich gets a bass solo, as you hear there, and I like that hand-clapping a la flamenco fun style.
Yeah. I really like the bass solo, too. This is a really happy and really lively bass solo, too. One of the best we've heard on the podcast, really, I think.
It's that meter that really makes it so lively. They work it into a final round of the blues and end it with a cool final flute flourish. Track 7, Si no fueras solo un sueño, if you weren't just a dream. This has a mysterious, dreamy atmosphere. Soft flute and guitar melody lines float over curious rhythmic piano and bass that has some dissonances. Listening to the piano, I think it feels like it's in a 9/8 meter, but then it changes up as it goes along. Let's check it out. It stays quite sparse, with some legato and then more animated flute improvisations and guitar fills. Fernandez adds a lot of light drum textures, and the guitar and piano join up for a final dreamy melody section that ends with an unresolved feeling. In the final track, Rumba Pati, this has a rhythm section intro of 16 measures with pulsing bass and hi-hat. The flute and guitar melody has a first section of 24 measures, then an interlude of flute and guitar exchanges before they come together for another unison section. Let's have a listen. Guitar, flute, and piano alternate shorter solo sections. Let's hear some of that interaction from where Brox comes back in. Comes down quieter for a bass solo from Ehrlich, and Ehrlich works it back into a pulsing bass line to bring back a final section of the flute and guitar melody. And that's the recording. Brox has a fabulous flute sound and technique. His solos have great agility and facility finding melodic phrases and often interesting paths of discovery through the harmonies of his own compositions. The whole recording has an airy lightness to it, partly due to the flute's atmosphere, but also wild, spacious guitar tone and the light textured drumming of Fernandez. Brox's compositions are fresh and unique, with lots of variations in structures and meters that will hold your attention. I enjoyed the improvisations all around from Obio's piano, Wild's guitar, in addition to Brox's flute work.
I thought this was a beautifully recorded album, too, with the rhythm especially emerging with a lot of depth of sound and crispness of attack. A lot of this album featured tracks with appealing and intriguing rhythmic patterns, especially Satanic Affair, we talked about that earlier, and Kalahari, too. Both evocative and drawing attention to the rhythm, even during solos, which are all played with passion. Like you, I enjoyed all the soloing on this album. It was really all very energetic and creative.
Yeah.
The bass solo on Satanic Affair is one of the most lively on the instrument that I've ever heard, really, as was the rhythm on that track. And I enjoyed Brox's playing a lot as well. And full disclosure, I'm a big fan of jazz flute. I think it just works well in the jazz idiom. But for me, it was the various rhythm patterns that caught my interest on this album. And I enjoyed the flute playing as well, of course.
Yeah. All right, and our final album, piano master Kenny Barron. His new release came out May 10th, Beyond This Place, on Artwork Records. Born in Philadelphia in 1943, he's had 13 Grammy nominations. He's a downbeat Hall of Famer. One of his first gigs ever was as a pianist with the Dizzy Gillespie Quartet, and as a leader, he has a really long discography. He's also an incredible accompanist. Between 1987 and 1991, he recorded several albums with Stan Getz, most notably Voyage, Bosses and Ballads, The Lost Sessions, Serenity, Anniversary, and People Time, which you can get as a 2-CD set, or you can get 6 CDs of the full recordings. It's a great showcase of Barron's suave accompaniment style, and we always say he's one of the classiest pianists. The last time we checked him out on the podcast was back in episode 102, Master Keys. That was his recording The Source, and that was the second solo piano recording of his career. And here he is with a quintet format. Kenny Barron, now 80 years old. His birthday's coming up on June 9th. We've got Emmanuel Wilkins on saxophone, a youngster in comparison, 26 years old, also from Philadelphia. Jonathan Blake, 48 years old, from Philadelphia as well. Kiyoshi Kitagawa on bass, 65 years old. He's a native of Osaka, Mike, but he immigrated to the U.S. in 1988. And we've got Steve Nelson on vibraphone, 69 years old, from Pittsburgh. So we've got a big Philadelphia and Pennsylvania connection on this album, and we've got an intergenerational kind of ensemble, which always makes things interesting, I think. And quite an interesting combination of tunes in the program. And the recording is going to get started with a standard, The Nearness of You, a Hoagie Carmichael tune from 1937. Barron gets it going, solo on piano, and Wilkins is in with the melody, sounding as tender as I've ever heard him play. Bass and drums slip in on the B section of the melody, and Kitagawa has some great ringing bass lines under the melody. At this slow tempo, it's hard to get much in a 1-minute sample of the melody, so let's start from the final turnaround of the melody into Wilkins' solo. Barron takes over from there, and there's some really great interplay from Kitagawa's bass. Wilkins is back for the final A section of the melody and a little cadenza before the ending, way up high on the alto sax. It's a really lovely performance. Track 2, Scratch, and this is a Kenny Barron original. It's the title track to a 1985 trio he recorded with Dave Holland and Daniel Humer. There's a 16-measure rhythm section intro with a charging walking bass line. Nelson joins in on this one on vibes. The melody is quirky and monkish, a 32-measure A-B-A-B structure, and Wilkins is off spiraling from there. Let's hear the tune get going. Blake beats up a storm of accents and fills as it goes freeform from there. Nelson gets to solo next on vibes as things go free again, but let's hear Baron's exploration on this tune when he gets his chance. He pushes the tension right to the end, getting the melody started again for the others to join in. There's an extra section of sax and piano exchanges before a repeat of the first melody section to end it. Track 3, a Baron original, Innocence. This is from his 1978 LP for Wolf Records of the same title. This is a slow, haunting minor tune. It starts with an 8-measure intro of rising bass and piano figures. There's a repeating 16-measure melody section taken by Wilkins and Nelson, then a contrasting 12-measure bridge that turns brighter before a final section of the 16-measure melody part again. Wilkins solos first with great tone and weaving lines. It's hard to get much of the melody in a sample at this slow tempo, so on this one, let's check out Nelson's vibe solo. Very cool rising lines and a clear ringing tone. Baron's solo here has rising waves of notes into more simple rhythmic figures and some bluesy ideas. The others rejoin on the bridge section into an A section, and then they vamp around on the bridge section pattern for Blake to work up some excitement to the ending. Track 4, Blues on Stratford Road. This is a Jonathan Blake original. It's a quirky blues tune that's a lot of fun. It's got a 12-bar blues-shaped melody, but there's a 3-measure tag section. The first time around, Wilkins and Nelson phrase the melody with a sticky hesitation and nice fills from Blake. The second time, it gets off swinging over Kitagawa's walking bass. Let's hear it. Nelson's off soloing from there with some speedy mallet work. Wilkins is next with smooth connected lines in his solo inside and out of the chords, and Baron has a tasty solo too. On this one, let's check out Kitagawa's melodic and snappy bass solo. And back to a couple rounds of the melody from there to wrap it up, in the opposite order of the beginning with the more sticky phrasing for the second time around the melody. Track 5, Tragic Magic, another Baron original. This was for his piano hero, Tommy Flanagan, from 1978's The Bassist by the Sam Jones Trio. A minor key, hard-bopping tune. It's a 32-measure AABA melody with rhythm section accents on the sax and vibes melody on the A sections and walking bass on the B sections. Wilkins is out of the gate on a soaring solo. Let's hear it get going into some of his solo. Nelson follows on vibes with exciting lines and some fun trills, and Baron follows that up. On this one, Blake gets his big solo with some really tight snare work and high speed around the kit, so let's check out his solo on this tune. and a final rung through the melody from there with some ending flurries. Track 6, the title track, Beyond This Place, a Baron original. It's slow and has a gospelly tinge. The melody is in AABA 32-measure form, with Baron and Wilkins taking the first A, and Nelson the second with Baron. Bass and drums join in on the contrasting B section, Blake with a clicky straight beat. This is another tune that is too slow to really capture much of the melody in a short sample, so let's have a listen to some of Baron's solo on this tune. Wilkins joins in there for some backing lines, leading up to a final time through the A section of the melody. Track 7, a standard, Softly as in a Morning Sunrise, from Sigmund Romberg, and the 1928 operetta The New Moon. This one's a duet between Baron and Blake. They make a 16-measure intro and then get into the famous minor melody. The interaction is great. It's a short tune at just over 3 minutes, but it's a lot of fun, and Baron sounds inspired. On this one, let's check out the ending of the tune. Track 8 is Sunset, another Baron original. This is from his 1973 recording Sunset to Dawn. It's a slow minor bossa-feeling tune with a hypnotic ostinato bass line. Wilkins and Nelson take the 16-measure repeating melody together. I like the little bass and piano dissonance at the end of the melody. Let's hear it go around one time. Once more. Then Nelson solos first here with a really relaxed approach, so let's check out some of the vibes on this tune. Wilkins follows from there, keeping the chilled mood with legato lines, and Baron gets the final solo with a nice measured rhythmic sense. After a couple more times around the melody, Baron continues on improvising with some soft sax backing from Wilkins, who blows on softly over the diminishing ostinato to final piano trickles. And the recording ends up with We See, a Thelonious Monk tune. It's the first track from his 1954 album, Monk. It's a duet for Baron and Wilkins. It's a fun 32-measure AABA monkey melody. Let's check out Wilkins' solo on this final tune. And Baron goes on his own from there for some bouncy fun, Wilkins joining back in for a final time around the melody. Last time we heard Kenny Barron, it was him solo. That recording had a lot of great subtle moments. Here it's an enjoyable intergenerational collaboration with the Philadelphia connection. The program is great with two standards, a focus on some of Barron's originals from over the course of his career, and a fun blues from Blake. The arrangements are intriguing, allowing for layers with the instrumentation from intimate duos to the full quintet. Barron sounds inspired by the setting with classy and inventive solos as always. Wilkins has a range of expression from silky smooth and subtle to searing boppy lines, and Nelson's vibes add a nice ring to the melodies, and he contributes well-developed solos. Blake's drumming is precise and exciting, and Kitagawa's bass is rock-steady and deep-toned. It's a great recording any way you measure it up.
Yeah, this is a gem of an album from Kenny Barron and his ensemble, which itself features some great players. We mentioned Emmanuel Wilkins a lot on sax. He's inspired throughout this album, and he and Barron seem to draw the best out of each other, too. It's nice to hear that those, generations kind of interacting like that. It's an album with a lot of variety on it, from the simple to the complex, the swinging to the cerebral. I especially like the old-timey jazz feel of, We See at the end, in the Monk tune. Really a perfect send-off. The rhythm section's propulsive when required to be, too. Barron is one of the jazz giants of our time, and he's really the elder statesman now, I would say. Yeah, I don't know who else there is now. I'm going to be interested in everything he does from now on, so I'm really glad to have heard this, and I'm going to keep my ears out for the rest of his career.
Yeah, let's hope he keeps going.
Yeah, I hope so. Another 20 years, please.
All right. That's it. It's been a good selection of music for episode 165.
Yeah, happy week again. Yeah.
Yeah. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And don't forget to check out the Same Difference Two Jazz Fans One Jazz Standard podcast. Their promo will be coming up when we sign off here. Episode 166. What do you have on the classical menu, Mike?
Well, I'm back to my kind of standard lineup. We're going to go Renaissance Mass next time with another Italian, Annibale Padovano, a new name for me as well. I always love discovering these new kind of composers. This is a new old composer from the Renaissance era. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, I have Alexandre Tarot's album Four Hands, which features him playing with a different pianist on each track.
Oh.
Some pretty famous four-handed stuff. It sounds like a fun album.
Yeah.
And I think we have another new contemporary composer, Valentin Silvestrov, Ukrainian composer. Actually, he was born during the Soviet days, so he's kind of, I guess, a former Soviet, now Ukrainian composer. And he's intrigued me for some time since his Symphony No. 5, so I'm always interested to hear what he has to do. He's sort of an elder statesman himself. He's getting up there in years, too. I think he's in his 80s now, so I'm interested to hear his new work.
Sounds interesting. In jazz, we're going to go back to Italy for the first recording with some vibes from Luigi Vitale. And vibes organ and clarinet. Sounds like an interesting combination, among other instruments there, with Kalimbata. That's the name of the ensemble on the album. We're going to go to Germany after that and hear guitarist Martin Schultz with one of our favorite pianists, Billy Test, in the group, on a recording called Little Fly. And we're going to hear from a young trumpet player on the Outside in Music label. Pretty excited to have a deep listen to this. This is Stuart Mack's Vibrations. So it should be an interesting program next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Some of those jazz things really have me intrigued.
Yeah.
Ready to hear them.
Lots of really good stuff this spring. I wonder what summer will hold, but we'll be sure to check all the new recordings and bring you our favorite ones here. Any final words before we sign off, Mike?
Yeah, even though Europe has managed to split the popular music trash atom, they still make great jazz and classical over there. I don't know. So that's what you need to be listening to. So let us be your guides, or just explore on your own.
Their pop music is so bad that
it's unbelievable.
Everybody's driven to jazz and classical.
I don't know how they do that. I don't think AI can be worse.
Probably not. Anyway, if you'd like to check out those recordings for next week ahead of time, while we're listening to them, there'll be a playlist up on Deezer, and we'll also have a link to it on our Facebook page a few hours after this episode is published. And so this has been episode 165, and we'll be back again next week with 166, talking about 6 new recordings. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Same difference. 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.